Hello, good morning. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Ogbanje Joseph. Welcome this afternoon, this evening to my series of lectures that I have here on the YouTube channel. Please hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about research hypothesis, the usefulness, the importance, or how to write research hypothesis in a project research. So, what is hypothesis? A hypothesis is a tentative statement about a phenomenon. It is a statement of assumption that is subject to further proof. It is a tentative statement formulated for the purpose of testing and reaching a conclusion. So, a hypothesis is a conjectural statement of relationship between two or more variables. Now, Nwogu, 1991, defines hypothesis as a conjectural proposition, an informed, intelligent guess about the solution to a problem. So it is an assumption or a proposition, an assumption or a proposition whose veracity and validity is to be established. So normally, hypothesis establishes relationship between two or more variables. So after a problem has been identified in a research work, certain enlightened, intelligent guesses, in form of hypotheses are proffered as answers or solutions. Now, these educated guesses may be based on experiences, observation, or information gathered, from others. But one thing we must know very quickly is that when we talk about hypothesis, we are actually looking at the fact that it is propositions or assumptions, that are actually formulated, which must be relevant to the research work. You cannot actually do hypothesis in a research work and it is not relevant to it. It has to be relevant to the problem under study, and it should relate to both the research objectives and the questions of the study. In fact, when you are formulating your hypothesis, it has to be in line with the research questions and the research objectives. In fact, I have said it before that if your objectives are 4, your research questions are 4, then your hypothesis, have to be 4. And when you are formulating your hypothesis in a project or in a research work, it has to be stated in a null form. Now, according to Nwogu, 1991, page 45 specifically, he said that there are 2 types of hypothesis, and these are statistical hypothesis and research hypothesis. According to him, he said that there are, research hypothesis, are postulations about the relationships between 2 or more variables that are of critical interest in the solutions of the research problem. Example of these is that students' poor attitude towards mathematics is due to the use of inadequate methods in teaching the subject. So that is actually research hypothesis. Now, research hypothesis does not express the variables in measurable terms. It does not express the variables in measurable terms, and hence it is not directly testable statistically. It is not directly testable statistically. Now let us look at the second type of hypothesis, which is statistical hypothesis. These are propositions about statistical populations which are to be derived on the basis of data collected from a sample of that population. So they express the relationship between two or more variables, but in a statistically measurable term. Okay, so those are the things. Now this statistical hypothesis is the one that can be formulated in null or alternative form. If it is formulated in a null form, it means it is a hypothesis that is formulated for the purpose of rejection, for the purpose of rejecting it. Okay, for example, you can talk about, okay, that there is no difference, or no relationship existing between two or more variables. Now if you say there is no effect or no difference, okay, so now the null hypothesis is talking about no effect, no difference, no relationship, and all of that, and it is represented with HO. Now you can actually formulate it like this, that there is no correlation between the productivity of highly motivated employees and the productivity of less motivated employees. Okay, now that is actually the null hypothesis. It is formulated for the purpose of rejection, for the purpose of rejecting it, and that is why it is actually represented with HO. Now I also told you that every research has to be, now when you are stating your hypothesis, it has to be stated in a null form. Okay, of course, when you state it like that, everybody knows that once the null hypothesis is actually stated, the alternative hypothesis is, the alternate of it. Okay, so you mustn't necessarily state it in your research work. Okay, so we now have the alternative hypothesis. Now, alternative hypothesis is a type of hypothesis that is formulated for the purpose of accepting it. For the purpose of accepting, it's always positive, and it is represented with H1. Okay, for example, if you say there is a correlation between the productivity of highly motivated employees within an organization. Now, if you say the presence of not makes it a null hypothesis, but the presence of there is, okay, and all of that, when a statement is positive, it is an alternative hypothesis. When a statement is negative, it is actually a null hypothesis. Okay, so those are the things. Now, what are the sources of hypothesis? Number one, experience. Now, the experience of the researcher and the experience of others can actually help the problem under investigation, as well as helping the researcher to bring out hypothesis. Okay, that's number one. Number two, literature. Okay, having gone through journals, textbooks, magazines, and all of that, a researcher is able to actually formulate the hypothesis from there. Okay, that is actually number two. Number three, theory. Hypotheses are also derived from theory through the process of deductive reasoning. Then number four, previous findings. Now the findings of other research works can actually help the researcher, to formulate his own hypothesis. Okay. Now let us look at the qualities of hypothesis. What are the qualities? What are the features of hypothesis? Number one, a hypothesis has to be testable. That is number one. It has to be testable. Okay, that is number one. Number two, a hypothesis is a statement of an expected relationship between two or more variables. It has to actually bring about the relationship between two or more variables for you to actually call it a hypothesis. Number three, it has to be plausible. Okay, a hypothesis must be based on what is consistent with reason. It has to be reasonable. It has to be something rational. Okay, that is the plausibility of a hypothesis. Okay, then number four, it has to be unambiguous. You don't make hypothesis to be too ambiguous in such a way that people will not be able to, fully grasp the meaning immediately. So it has to be clear, unambiguous, and and stated in simple terms. Okay. Then number 5, it has to be consistent with current knowledge. It has to be consistent with current knowledge. It should be able to, it should not contradict established knowledge. Okay. Now, let us look at the functions of hypothesis in a research work. What are the functions of hypothesis, or what are the advantages of hypothesis in a research work? Number 1, it limits the focus of investigation to a definite target and determine what observations are to be made. Okay, that is number 1. Number 2, it provides a guide and direction to the research. This ensures that the only relevant data are collected. So it is hypothesis that guides you to collect only data that are relevant. Okay. Number 3, it is used to sensitize and focus the researcher's attention to the important aspects of the problem under investigation. Then number 4, it provides the framework for drawing interpretations and conclusions. Okay. Then number 5, it helps the researcher, okay, to identify the methods and procedures that will be fruitful in the analysis of the data. So let me be very quick to add here that hypothesis in a research work is only used for a quantitative research. Now, if your research is statistically or mathematically inclined, in which case in chapter 4 you're going to test using statistical or mathematical procedures. That is when you use hypothesis in the research work. But if your work is actually qualitative research, then you quickly use propositions instead of hypothesis. In proposition, in your chapter 4, you don't need to test the proposition using statistical process. It has to be done using content analysis or textbook analysis. Using simple percentages and then just textual analysis. So those are the things. Thank you very much.